Okay, we're live. Welcome to Superpower Broadcasting. I'm Kevin Castley. This is debate night. I'm debating death to Western imperialism. This has been a long time in the running, but here we are. A lot of people wanted to see this one. And if you're interested in debating me, you can shoot me a DM on Twitter and we will work out a time to debate. With that, we got death to Western imperialism here. So basically, I guess you're not really a big fan of the Western order. You're a fan of Russia and China. So I guess make your case.
Okay, first off, I would like to say that if my name is too long, then you can just call me Death or whatever, if it's too long for you to pronounce. Yeah, sorry about that. And I'm an anti-imperialist, and the reason why is because I consider the US empire to be the biggest imperialist threat to world peace. And yeah, I support Russia and China because, in my opinion, they are the only powers capable of standing up to the US empire and who are the lesser of two evils. In fact, I would even go as far as arguing that everything neocons, neolibs, and Western governments accuse their adversaries for is nothing but projection to justify their own imperialist aggression. Russia and China aren't the ones who have hundreds of bases across the world, waging dozens of endless wars based off of lies, which have killed and displaced millions of people, and bullying smaller nations with sanctions and military buildups. That would be the United States. It's the US who's literally been waging an imperialist war on terror since the early 2000s, which has killed 800,000 people and displaced 37 million more. Plus, it's the US who's bullying Russia and China and trying to turn them into like an enemy, not the other way around. Russia and China aren't the ones warmongering against the US and trying to surround the US in its sphere of influence by having military buildups to the American border and supporting color revolutions in America's neighbors. Rather, it's the US who's doing that to Russia and China, thus showing who the real aggressor is, in my opinion. Even if we were to somehow include Russia's annexation of Crimea or China's buildup in the South China Sea as forms of imperialism and aggression, like people like you like to point out, it's literally nothing in comparison to everything the US empire has done since the start of the 21st century with its war on terror, quote unquote, that has destroyed the Middle East. The entire idea of Russia and China being an international threat is nothing more than a manufactured hoax cooked up by the deep state and the military-industrial complex to continue justifying US imperialism. Russia and China have no interests in being world threats, and they wouldn't even be able to afford being threats even if they wanted to. Russia could barely even afford fighting jihadi terrorists in Chechnya, and China hasn't been involved in any foreign conflicts since 1979. Their only interests in the world are their spheres of influence, and they're only defending themselves from US aggressions. And the US accusations against Russia of meddling in elections and Iran being the biggest state sponsor of terrorism is just projection from the fact that it's the US who has constantly been meddling in elections all across the world since the end of World War II, and who is the biggest state sponsor of terrorism alongside Saudi Arabia. It's the US who has constantly supported military coups all around the world, installing puppet dictators, and even supporting 70% of the world's dictatorships, thus showing how much of a lie the whole claim about wanting to spread freedom and democracy really is. And it's the US who has constantly supported terrorists and proxy wars, including Sunni Islamist jihadi terror groups, in places like Syria, Afghanistan, and Libya, which also kind of shows how much of a lie the war on terror really is. I mean, last time I checked, Iran isn't the one who helped create ISIS and Al-Qaeda and the Taliban to overthrow secular governments who are aligned with Russia. That was what the US did. And don't tell me it's a conspiracy theory, because I know that's what you're going to say, Kevin, because Hillary Clinton herself admitted in an interview that the US created Al-Qaeda and the Taliban in Afghanistan to fight the Soviets. And there were leaked emails from 2012 on WikiLeaks that reveal Jake Sullivan admitting Al-Qaeda is on America's side in Syria and helping the rebels. And I believe there was also another leaked email where Hillary Clinton admits that Saudi Arabia and Qatar are supporting ISIS. So, yeah, that's my case.
There's a lot to go over there. A lot of points. Yeah, some conspiracy theories and whatnot, but are you using an audio changer actually, or is that your real voice?
I have some issues, so with my audio, so maybe that's why it sounds different.
Okay, yeah, some big issues with the audio. Okay, so So you said that the war on terror was manufactured basically by the West to justify going around and killing. I think you said 800,000 people in the Middle East. Where like, okay, I'm going to need a source on that. But
Okay.
do you deny that Al Qaeda did 9/11, or like, do you think that was Bush?
I believe it's a false flag.
False flag. Okay, wait. So was Bush stupid and incompetent, or was he like some evil mastermind genius dude who pulled off
I mean, I don't think it was only George Bush. I believe intelligence agencies and other like groups could have been involved. I mean, 2 planes can't take down 3 buildings, and I'm sure it's just a coincidence that the country with the most powerful air force in the world failed to intercept any planes that day, and that 2 planes were able to cause that much damage to 2 towers.
So we got the building 7 meme in there too. So like, okay, so building 7, you know that it was the fires that resulted in the structural integrity at the base of the building that resulted in it collapsing, right? Or do you think that like the U.S. planted bombs in the building to bring it down?
It wouldn't surprise me. Was there any investigation?
Well, there was the 9/11 commission that found that that wasn't the case, but okay.
I mean, like an independent investigation, like independent of the U.S. government. Like, I'm not going to trust the U.S. government.
But why would it have to be independent of the U.S. government? Like, okay, so you think that the U.S. government did 9/11, but that's insane. Like, we're already in crazy land, man. Like, what is this? Like 2004 Michael Moore level, Ron Paul? Like,
Well, I mean, yeah, I'm sure it's just a coincidence that neocons already had plans for regime change in Afghanistan and Iraq and 5 other Muslim countries before the attacks happened. And those attacks just happened to give them the excuse to justify the war on terror. Like, it's just a coincidence, I'm sure.
Then why weren't there 5 other wars? Why was it just Afghanistan and Iraq? Why not
Syria and Libya had wars as well.
Okay, but the U.S. didn't do war in Syria. The U.S. did war in Libya, but that took 10 years to get around to. So that's kind of a long time gap.
The U.S. is literally occupying Syria's oil fields right now, as we're debating.
Syria has hardly anything in the way of oil. Like, if the U.S. wanted to do war against Assad, Assad would be dead right now, right? You admit that, right? Like, if the U.S. empire, as you would say, wanted Assad dead, he'd be gone. Like, you have to admit that.
Why did they support the rebels?
No. Even if you think it's imperialist, you have to concede that if the U.S. empire wanted to do war against Syria, that regime would be gone, right? Just like Saddam and the Taliban.
Then why did they support the rebels? So what? That was just nothing.
Yeah, but supporting rebels isn't a war. Like, it's you could say maybe it's a proxy war-ish, except the rebels weren't given very much funding at all, actually. Like, so you think it's like a war for oil in Syria? Is that it?
A number of factors. I believe it was also for like Israel and Turkey, like, because they had their own imperialist like intentions in the country as well. I believe it was also for like maybe Rothschild centralized banks, and I've also heard the possibility that it could have been orchestrated for like a gas pipeline. Like, I'm a bit skeptical towards the gas pipeline one, but
what? Why not just put the pipeline like through Iraq and Turkey instead?
I'm skeptical of that one.
Okay.
But I do believe it could have been like for other interests like Israel, like because like Syria's like relationship with Iran and like their opposition to like Israel's occupation of the Golan Heights, and of course Turkey having their own like interest as well with like their current Islamist government.
Okay, but so your issue with Israel, I guess we can get into that. Do you think Israel did 9/11? Like, do you think they were a part of that? Because some people, some tankies and some Nazis and stuff have said that Israel basically dancing Israelis did 9/11. But what do you make of that?
I mean, is there any refutation of the 5 dancing Israelis?
Yes. That
what is it?
Yes. And besides which, what would 5 dancing Israelis, even if it were true, what would that prove about the state of Israel doing 9/11?
Well, 2 of them were Mossad agents, and like, why would they be celebrating the 9/11 attacks?
Well, okay, one, they didn't. That was a hoax. Like, that was fake news. But even if it were true that some dudes that were born in Israel were dancing somewhere, I think in New Jersey or something, that wouldn't mean that they did 9/11 still. Like, that. Okay. So what other conspiracy theories do you believe in?
What don't you consider to be a conspiracy theory?
So, do you think Assad didn't gas his own people?
Yeah, of
Okay.
course. OPCW whistleblowers confirmed that to be a hoax. Like, you know that, right? Ian Henderson, Dr. Brendan Williams, like, they were on the OPCW and they came out and confirmed it was a hoax.
Okay, a couple people on the OPCW panel can say whatever the hell they want. That doesn't mean, like, look, I'm not a fan of the UN. I'm not a fan of these large, liberal institutionalisms of, oh, let's just like investigate and then give a harsh word to the Syrian dictator. But they did find that he gassed people. It was apparent that he did gas people. And okay, so you got a couple of people that say, no, may I want that Kremlin money, may I want that Assad money, like Jimmy Dore and Abby Martin. That doesn't actually prove anything. So
they were involved in the investigation and they confirmed it was a hoax and that it was like the whole report was doctored. Like, how does this not confirm anything to you?
So who do you think perpetrated the chemical weapons attack then in 2017?
It was staged. We have video clips of the white helmets, like, training like Syrian kids to play along in false flag operations. We have pictures of them like staging stuff. It was staged.
So it wasn't okay, because I've heard people say, oh, it was the rebels that gassed people, but you're arguing nobody was even gassed. Those were just crisis actors, I guess, is what you're getting at.
Yep, right. That's what I believe. The white helmets have been exposed for staging things in Syria. Robert Fisk even went to Syria to investigate the chemical attacks and found that any deaths that he saw were most likely due to dust, like in the air and all that stuff.
Okay. So you don't think that Assad used chemical weapons? Okay. Do you think the atrazine in the water turns the frogs gay?
No.
No. Okay. So you don't believe in that. What about the chemtrails? What do you think about the chemtrails? You think that's like legit?
I don't give a shit.
Okay. So like, okay. What about, what's another one? Oh, my USS Liberty. What do you think of that? My USS Libertad. Are you one of those guys that basically argues that Israel is not a true ally of America because Israel accidentally targeted a U.S. ship decades ago? Are you one of those guys?
I will admit I haven't done enough research on the USS Liberty, so I don't know about that one.
Okay.
I just know it because of people on the internet.
Fair enough. Where do you get your news from? Like, what sources do you go to for information?
The Gray Zone, Russia Today, Sputnik.
Sputnik News, right? Okay. Yeah, I've read Sputnik before. Yeah.
Certainly better than the fake news that we see on CNN and Fox News.
Oh yeah, fake news, fake U.S. Yankee corporate news, right? Like, give me that Russian state news. Let me ask you this: you read People's Daily or Rodong Sinmun in North Korea?
Sometimes. It's not like the main source or anything.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah. No, I check them out sometimes. When I want to see what the regime is saying, for sure. So, so got a question for you. So in your cover picture, you've got the Russian bear and the Chinese panda bear terrifying the hell out of NATO and like the Yankees and stuff. But like, let's say Russia and China went to war, and like, which side are you going to be rooting for?
Why would Russia and China go to war?
They had a big battle in the 1960s, few thousand troops.
That was over like territory disputes, which they've resolved.
Okay. Well, new ones can always crop up, and Putin and Xi Jinping don't always necessarily get along. I think it's pretty obvious that as China increases their, economic and imperial ambitions, that they're going to run into issues with Russian spheres of influence, right? Like, let's say China and Russia went to some proxy war over Africa or somewhere in Latin America, for example, or even in Asia, North Korea, etc. Who are you going to be rooting for? Like, who's like the top dog in your view? Is it Russia or China, or do you like them both equally?
I mean, I really doubt that they would go to war with each other because the U.S. empire is a much bigger threat to them than they are to each other. So it's the U.S. that's surrounding them in their sphere of influence and having military buildups, to their borders. So I really doubt this would happen.
Okay. So, like, let's say it was reversed and Russia and China had hundreds of bases around America and America's allies, and America had, like, basically nothing anywhere near Russia and China. Would you prefer that world over what we have now?
I don't see why that would happen. Russia's main interests are within their sphere of influence. Same thing with China.
Then why are they in Venezuela?
Like militarily?
Yeah, they've literally deployed Tu-160 thermonuclear bombers over there to prop up Maduro. Why are they in Venezuela? That's America's sphere of influence. Wouldn't you agree?
I guess.
Oh, interesting. So interesting, because usually the spheres of influence bros, they always talk about how Ukraine's Russia's sphere of influence and how Korea's China's sphere of influence, but they always defend Maduro. But you're saying right here that Latin America, I guess, Venezuela, part of the American sphere, right? Can we at least agree on that?
I mean, sure. I mean, all these countries are, regional powers, so yeah.
Okay, so if America did a regime change war, say, for example, in Venezuela or Cuba to assert a hegemony there, would you oppose it? Or would you say that's their sphere of influence?
No, of course I would oppose it, because at the end of the day, like, the U.S. would be, like, invading and toppling, like, governments that are, like, legitimate to the country.
Okay, so you think, like, Maduro and the Communist Party in Cuba are the legitimate, governments over there, but you don't recognize the American government as legitimate, though. Is that right?
I mean, the U.S. government is also legitimate as well if the American people are voting for it.
Okay, because you mentioned the deep state. So, like, do you think that the U.S. government doesn't represent the American people?
I do believe that, like, the 1% don't represent, like, the American people, like the elites and all that, and, like, that they have their own corrupt interests. But of course, if the American people themselves are voting for politicians like, like Joe Biden or Donald Trump, then of course, I'm going to recognize, like, the president as legitimate.
Okay, so do you? Okay, you talked about America as an empire. You talked about America as imperialist. You talked about imperial ambitions. If America is an empire, though, where are America's colonies? Like, why is Iraq and Afghanistan? Why are they free sovereign countries? Like, why aren't they colonies of America? Why aren't they states of America or something?
You can be an empire and not have colonies. Like, I'm pretty sure like the Roman Empire didn't have colonies, right? Like, not every empire was colonial.
The Roman Empire would just basically go in and require tribute, and yeah, they had the equivalent of modern colonies, but they'd also have other areas that they delegated responsibility to other governments that had to pay tribute to Rome. Why doesn't the Afghan government and the Iraqi government have to pay money to America each month as tribute?
I mean, they're already heavily reliant on the U.S., aren't they?
Also, I'm not buying the line that that Rome didn't have colonies. I mean, Rome would conquer a bunch of places and make it part of the empire. They had slaves. They literally had slaves, though, that they would take from the colonies, right? So, like, they were a literal empire. I guess the thing that I'm getting at is, like, you can argue that, well, America's hegemonic. They're not like a traditional empire or anything. But I would argue that that's not even imperial at that point. I mean, America doesn't act like an empire. If America acted like an empire, America wouldn't have been spending all this money to try to, basically stabilize Iraq and whatnot. They would just basically go in there, shoot everybody that resisted, and then take the oil and demand tribute as overlords. Like that's what empire.
I mean, America does act like an empire, though. It constantly invades and bombs other countries based off of lies and has destabilized many countries.
Name one.
Libya.
So what lie did the U.S. use to justify helping the rebels take out Gaddafi?
Okay, how about the lie that Gaddafi was killing his own people, even though only a few thousand Libyans were killed in the conflict, or the fact that the U.S. was helping like democratic forces, even though the rebels in Libya were Islamists?
Wait, hold on. We're going to go through this one by one. You said the lie that Gaddafi was killing his own people, even though he killed only a few thousand people. He killed a lot of people, but let's say it was a few thousand. That's still his own people. So you just admitted that it wasn't a lie. So that just contradicts your argument.
Every conflict has people getting killed, though, but even then, it was a small number. It wasn't like a genocide, like the way Western propagandists exaggerated.
Okay, but it doesn't have to be a genocide to be bad. Syria isn't a genocide, and yet upwards of 500,000 people are dead from Assad, right? So, like, you just admitted that he killed his own people, though. So how's that a lie?
Because like the claim was that Gaddafi was going to like commit all kinds of massacres, yet only a few thousand people died in the conflict.
Wait, hold on a second. He did do massacres, though. They slaughtered people. What are you talking about? Like, when the people rose up against Gaddafi, the Gaddafi regime butchered the country. They burned the country, basically. I mean, and yeah, you can say, oh, well, people die in war or whatever. The Gaddafi regime killed a ton of people before the revolution even started. I mean, you can look into his record of political prison camps, for example. I mean, the man killed more than a few thousand Libyans. But even if it was only a few thousand, that's still killing his own people. So I don't see how that's a lie. So.
Okay, but like the U.S. has killed like what 800,000 people from the war on terror. So I guess you just admitted that the U.S. has killed way more people than Gaddafi. Then, if we're going to play by your own logic.
Okay, that's a false equivalence. First off, if the U.S. kills terrorists, that's not morally equal to Gaddafi killing people trying to defend their right to democracy and liberty. So, cool false equivalence, bro. Equivocated again.
The U.S. has killed thousands of civilians as well.
Gonna need a citation on the 800,000 dead from the war on terror. Like, where are you getting that number from? The Gray's House?
Okay, sure.
What's that?
No, wait. Let me wait. I have it somewhere.
Okay. Because, yeah, collateral damage happened. I mean, the U.S., the war in Iraq, for example, that resulted in about 20,000 deaths for coalition.
The Hill. The Hill.
Okay, so the Hill is a hack job place. But, okay, 800,000. Which countries? That's an absurdly high number. Like, what are you including in the war on terror? Which wars are you including in that?
Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, Pakistan. It's all there. Somalia.
Okay, but so you understand that a lot of the people that were killed, and in fact, the sole targets of U.S. action in those areas, with the exception of Iraq, was to take out terrorists specifically. In Iraq, it was to take out terrorists as well as the Ba'athist regime that was harboring them. But yes, they killed a lot of enemy combatants. That's true. Why do you care if terrorists or enemy combatants are killed? They're enemies of America.
Well, most of the people that get killed are civilians.
Okay, I'm going to need a citation on that. Yeah, collateral damage absolutely happens, but when Tulsi Gabbard, Tinky Tulsi, when she says that 90% of those who are killed in drone strikes were civilians, that's BS. It's nowhere near close. It's nowhere near close. It's like less. It's less than half. It depends on the conflict and everything. But you understand that the U.S. isn't targeting civilians; they're targeting terrorists, and sometimes civilians wind up dying.
The U.S. targets civilians all the time. Look at Raqqa after it was bombed into oblivion by the U.S.
Raqqa was an ISIS stronghold. The U.S. was targeting ISIS and their fighters there, and in that
they targeted civilians.
Well, in that city in particular, a huge percentage of the city was actually ISIS combatants and ISIS fighters, basically. Some civilians wound up dying in that. But here's the problem. Here's the problem with your whole take, which is that the U.S. has invested literally over $1 trillion over the years into reducing collateral damage by making Hellfire missiles and other armaments more accurate and precise, and the delivery systems more accurate and precise, such as drones, as opposed to carpet bombing with B-52s. Your dad over in Russia, Putin, when he goes in and bombs cities in Syria, like Idlib, for example, he straight up just carpet bombs the whole place, just levels the whole city. And even recently, in order to dispel or to fight back with the allegations that his Iskander missile system had a 90% failure rate in the Armenian-Azerbaijan war last year, he put out a video of an Iskander warhead blowing up a hospital. So you want to talk about civilians? Your boys in Russia butcher civilians basically on purpose to get the population to submit.
There is no evidence of that. That's just Western propaganda cooked up by the white helmets. And the reason why sometimes civilians get bombed in buildings is because the terrorist moderate rebels, quote unquote, keep taking them as hostages.
Wow. Okay. So Russia, the Kremlin, put out the video. They put out the video of destroying the hospital to prove that their missile works. Which, by the way, for the record, doesn't even prove it. It shows that was one of the 10% that worked, but
that's anecdotal, though. It's just one hospital you're citing.
Oh, just one hospital. So would you agree that Russia bombing a hospital is a war crime?
Depends. Was it deliberate?
Yeah, they used the video to prove that their stuff works and it was accurate, and they blew up a hospital in Syria.
No, I mean, as in, did they know there were like no rebels or whatever, like no rebels in the hospital, and they just bombed it to kill civilians?
Well, there were rebels in the hospital. The hospital was treating rebel fighters, right?
Oh, so there were Al Qaeda supporters helping out Al Qaeda members.
So let me get this straight. You think it's acceptable to blow the hell out of a hospital just because some of the people in the hospital are wounded combatants that aren't actually in combat anymore? That's fine. That's not a war crime in your view, even though it's officially a war crime.
Like, they're still terrorists and they're still going to continue fighting. They're jihadists.
Oh, yeah. Let's bomb a hospital to stick it to the terrorists, right? That's great logic there, Death.
Whatever you say, you're saying that as if the U.S. doesn't target civilians 24/7.
Okay, where's an example of the United States specifically targeting civilians? Because the U.S. targets terrorists and sometimes civilians die, but where is the U.S. specifically targeted civilians in the war on terror? Like, don't give me Hiroshima, don't give me any of that bullshit. Where in the war on terror has America targeted civilians?
Okay, like I said, Raqqa, Syria. There was a wedding in Yemen. There was drone strikes by Obama. Like, there were plenty of examples.
Collateral damage, Death. That was collateral damage. They had
intel. It's just an accident. It's just an accident. Yeah, I'm sure.
They had intel based on cellular tracking that there were terrorists in the area, and when they went in to kill them, turns out, oh well, there was a wedding here, or there was a wedding there. They weren't aware of that. And if that information had been brought to light, there have been cases, and it's been documented, of the U.S. actually standing down and letting terrorists get away because the area was too dense with civilians. Whereas the Russians, they just blow up hospitals. And you're arguing here, oh, but there were rebels in the hospital, as if that makes it okay. Like, you understand that even if everybody in the hospital was a wounded rebel, that would still be a war crime, right?
They're combatants, though.
They're wounded combatants being treated in a recognized hospital, right? So you recognize that that's a war crime, right? Because it seems like you're arguing, like, because here's the thing, Death. It seems like what you're advocating for is actual terrorism. Just call people you don't like terrorists and then bomb their hospitals. That's you sound like Hamas right now.
I'm not the Al Qaeda supporter.
Where do I support Al Qaeda?
Don't tell me you believe the moderate rebels crap in 2021. Like, the Syrian rebels are literally Al Qaeda at this. Like, everyone who isn't a Shiite knows that at this point. And I also recall you once said that you would rather have Al Qaeda over the Soviet Union. So, like, you admit that the U.S. supported Al Qaeda.
I never said that. Right? I never said that. Way to take my words out of context. I said I supported the Mujahideen over the Soviet Union. I thought that the Mujahideen was supposed to be the Taliban. Now they're Al Qaeda. What are they going to be next? Care bearers? What are they going to be next? The Brigade of Care Bearers?
Osama bin Laden literally fought alongside them. Like, some of them joined Al Qaeda.
He wasn't a part of Al Qaeda. He was part of the Mujahideen at the time. He went on way down the road to form Al Qaeda. You're aware that when he was fighting with the Mujahideen, he was Al Qaeda didn't exist yet. Like, that's why I asked where you're getting your news from, because you admitted straight up you get your news from Sputnik, you get your news from Russia Today, and you get your news from the Gray Zone. So
yeah, last time I checked, none of those media outlets lied about Saddam Hussein having weapons of mass destruction.
Saddam did have weapons of mass destruction, though. What are you talking about? He used them on his own people. He gassed his own people. Oh, so do you acknowledge that chemical weapons are a weapon of mass destruction, or is that just are weapons of mass destruction only nukes, bro?
I mean, of course, they're weapons of, like, I do acknowledge it, but like the thing, you're phrasing it very disingenuously, though.
Yeah, no. So you deny that he had chemical weapons?
Who supplied those chemical weapons?
France and the Soviet Union, almost exclusively.
And not the United States.
98% of his arms sales were derived from France and the USSR.
The U.S. also supplied chemical weapons to him during the 80s.
No, the U.S. gave him intelligence on Iranian locations, and the Iraqi army used chemical weapons against Iranian forces. That was a total war between two very bad actors. And the U.S. sided with Saddam temporarily because obviously Iran was, Iran was the worst evil in that example at that time. Now that what you don't understand though is, like, you're doing all these moralistic arguments about Saddam and I guess the Kirkpatrick doctrine at large. Yet you, to my understanding, you support Syria propping up Assad. Is that correct? You support, or I should say, you support Russia propping up Assad. Is that correct?
Yes, I would rather have Assad in power than Al Qaeda or ISIS.
Well, Russia did hardly anything to fight ISIS. It was almost exclusively America that did it. It seems like Russia's more interested in just bombing cities into submission so that they'll obey their puppet Assad.
It was Russia and Iran who defeated ISIS.
That's incorrect. The
U.S. armed ISIS.
It was the United States that was responsible for the vast majority of bombs that actually hit ISIS targets.
The U.S. was literally dropping leaflets on ISIS-held territory to warn ISIS members.
Okay, I'm going to need a citation on that. Where are you getting that from?
Okay, like Obama was dropping leaflets. Wait.
No, I'm asking, where are you getting that from? That is an extraordinary claim that the U.S. was assisting ISIS. I need a source is all I'm asking for.
Okay. USA Today, military.com, like, you could literally just go to Google. Like, it's literally there. Like, leaflets.
Google, bro, right? No. I'm going to need a specific article from a reputable source saying that the United States was assisting ISIS, because that's a load of horse crap, dude.
Okay, how about the leaked email from Hillary Clinton admitting that U.S. allies like Saudi Arabia were supporting ISIS, or the fact that U.S. weapons themselves ended up in the hands of ISIS members?
Saudi Arabia was not supporting ISIS. Where was the House of Saud supporting ISIS?
Like in Syria.
And what proof do you have? You've got you say you've got an email of Hillary Clinton. What?
The leaked email from 2016 of Hillary Clinton admitting this on WikiLeaks.
What email, dude? I mean, so you're, even if you were to present me that from WikiLeaks, all that you have is that Julian Assange doesn't like Hillary Clinton, and that you've got this email that's not verified to be true, that implies that she says that Saudi Arabia is funding
Hillary. She never even denied the email being fake or anything like that.
Okay, but you're gonna have to actually like send me either a screenshot of the email or something, because right now it seems like you're just doing a slander job against the former Secretary of State at this point. Let me ask you this: what's your view of Donald Trump and Julian Assange then?
Donald Trump, he's an idiot. What else do you want me to say?
Okay, so you're not like a Trump supporter or anything. Okay, so
No.
who do you support in U.S. politics?
Like neither side. Both of them are just tools for the military-industrial complex.
If that's true, then why is basically everybody anti-war in the U.S. establishment? They just want to do free trade with dictators and lift sanctions and do free trade and stuff. Why are they flooded with neoliberals and liberal internationalists?
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question?
Yeah. So if both parties are just in the pocket or whatever, the military-industrial complex, why then is the U.S. so reluctant to do anything about Iran or China or whatever, and instead would prefer to lift sanctions and do free trade for cheap shoes for big corporations? Like, why?
The U.S. is literally surrounding them in their sphere of influence and having like military buildups to their borders and sanctioning them.
The U.S. Well, okay, so under Obama, for example, you said that the U.S. was that both sides were beholden to, I guess, the Pentagon and the military-industrial complex. Then why did Obama and now Biden's administration, to some extent, but especially Obama, why did they lift sanctions on Iran, give Iran $150 billion unfrozen assets so that they could fund terror, and work with them on this stupid deal that was basically giving them a time frame to get nukes? Why? Like, if they were beholden to the military-industrial complex, wouldn't the U.S. have bombed Iran, invaded Iran? Wouldn't the U.S. have invaded Pakistan? Wouldn't the U.S. be invading everywhere if that were true?
Maybe because the U.S. still has its fingers tied in Afghanistan and Iraq.
That's hardly any troops, though. That's hardly anything. That's a few thousand people. The U.S. military is massive, dude. I don't understand. Like, what I don't understand is, like, if they're beholden to the military-industrial complex, where are the wars? Because it seems to me that the Democrats, especially under Obama, they don't actually want war. They just want to do free trade, bro, for cheap contracts and stuff, for shoes.
Obama conducted more drone strikes than George Bush.
But drone strikes are barely anything. That's not like an actual war against a state. That's just targeting a terrorist here or there. Like I've said it before. I find drone strikes to be like the bare minimum. Drone strikes are the bare minimum. Like, if I'm in charge, we're going into North Korea and Iran on day one, right? And not just with drones, like with serious firepower. Your best is that Obama did drones against Al Qaeda. That's it. Let me ask you this: why don't you want to fight Al Qaeda? Why don't you want to wage the war on terror?
Who said I'm against fighting Al Qaeda? I support Russia bombing Al Qaeda. You support Al Qaeda in Syria.
Okay, where have I said that I support Al Qaeda in Syria? I've said before that compared to Assad, Al Qaeda has killed way fewer people, which is true. That's how much of a butcher Assad is. But you're like a big simp for Assad. Why is Assad so much better than Al Qaeda?
Maybe because he's a secular leader who protects minorities, and everything you hear about him is a constant lie from Western propaganda.
He protects minorities. Let me guess. He protects Christians, bro. Right? Is that where we're going with?
Alawites and Shias.
Yeah. So then why? Okay. Well, he protects. No. Okay. You say, oh, he protects minorities. He is Alawite. His family is Alawite. They lord over the rest of the country. They lord over the rest of the country. If he protected minorities, explain what the fuck happened with the Kurds, dude. Explain that shit. And I'm not just talking about in the war. Explain Hafez al-Assad's treatment of the Kurds. Explain Bashar's treatment before the war broke out. Oh, he protects minorities. He protects his own clan. Well, no shit. He protects the Alawites. He is an Alawite, dipshit.
So what's your point? So therefore we should give Syria to Sunni Islamists and let them kill the Alawites?
Also, how is he secular? How is he secular? The dude literally has worked, and his dad worked with suicide bombers going back to the freaking 1970s. And he supports a number of different terrorist organizations, including Hezbollah. Do you recognize Hezbollah?
Hezbollah are not terrorists. That's just Zionist propaganda. They're resistance fighters against Israeli occupation.
Hezbollah isn't terrorists. So, like, if you can't recognize Hezbollah as terrorists, how can I take you seriously that you don't like Al Qaeda?
Last time I checked, Hezbollah haven't conducted like suicide bombings in Europe, attacking civilians like the way ISIS and Al Qaeda have, which were armed and supported by the U.S. and its allies.
Wait, hold on a second. Hezbollah routinely conducts terrorist attacks against Israel. What are you talking about? They attack
you mean defending Lebanon from Israeli invasions, right?
No. When Israel goes into Lebanon, it's to stamp out Hezbollah. It's an anti-terrorist operation.
Israel is a terrorist state in itself that's suppressing Palestinians. Who the fuck is a terrorist according to Zionists?
Okay, how is Israel terrorists?
How about the fact that they're committing genocide against Palestinians?
How are they committing genocide against Palestinians? Last time I checked, every time Hamas lobs off a ton of rockets to try to kill as many Jews as possible, Israel responds very carefully to try to limit civilian deaths. If they were trying to do a genocide against them, they've got the firepower. Why not just wipe them off the map? They could just kill every Palestinian tomorrow.
In what universe does Israel limit civilian deaths? They constantly bomb civilians and shoot them all the time.
No. Hamas takes civilians as hostages, and Israel tries to limit civilian deaths, and they do precision strikes. They do precision strikes. If they wanted to genocide the Palestinians, they could just carpet bomb them into oblivion. Why don't they just do that?
That's what they do.
No, but they don't. Do you even know what carpet bombing means, dude?
Yes, certainly more than you do.
Okay, what does carpet bombing mean?
Bombing.
Bombing. No, so if one drone fires one Hellfire missile and it detonates, releasing a small yield bomb of conventional explosives at, say, a weapons depot in the desert, that's carpet bomb. It was a bomb, dude. That was a carpet bomb, dude. There was a bomb, dude. It was a carpet bomb. So, do you understand? We have a term for carpet bombing that distinguishes it from regular bombing. Like, why would that even be a term if carpet bombing just meant bombing? Like, you understand that there's a difference, right?
Yeah, I was just,
just being a troll. Just being a troll.
Whatever.
Yeah. Oh man. So you got any questions for me? I had a lot of questions for you.
Yeah, sure. Why are you such a simp for Saudi Arabia?
Why am I such a simp for Saudi Arabia? Because Saudi Arabia, look, I've got my criticisms of the regime in terms of their domestic policy. I'm not really a fan. However, they have moderated and they have liberalized in a direction towards progress, whereas their adversaries in Iran and Russia have moved worlds backwards. And in 40 years, Saudi Arabia will look like the UAE, whereas in 40 years, Russia and Iran will look like North Korea or close to it. And so Saudi Arabia, and that's just the domestic level, Saudi Arabia on the international level, they do everything to try to keep peace and stability in the region. They have gone from embargoing the U.S. for siding with Israel back in the 70s to actually working with Israel, which is remarkable, and they deserve a world of credit for that. They do everything in their power to keep oil prices low, which hurts Iran and Russia because they have very high break-even costs of oil, and that helps our interests in terms of countering our rivals in the world. Additionally, they are the routine victims of attacks from Iran and their proxies and the Houthis in Yemen, and they never even really retaliate for it. And yet they get no credit for that. In Yemen, where Iran is basically propping up basically genocidal maniacs with the Houthis that are starving the Yemeni people right now. What does Saudi Arabia do? They target the Houthis, yes, but they've also contributed well over $1 billion since the war started towards alleviating hunger in Yemen. Saudi Arabia is a force for stability. They are a force for essentially Western hegemony over the Middle East. And additionally, they're reforming in a positive direction. They are a classic example of why Jeane Kirkpatrick argued that a pro-Western dictator is better than an anti-Western dictator. And I would side with them 1,000 times out of 1,000 over Assad and Iran and Russia and North Korea and the Houthis and Hezbollah. No, I'll take Saudi Arabia over them any day. So what do you have against Saudi Arabia?
Well, how about the fact that they're the ones who are committing genocide in Yemen?
Gonna need a citation on that. If they're committing genocide in Yemen, why did the King Salman Relief Agency? Why did they spend over $1 billion of their own money keeping the Yemeni people from starving to death? Here's the problem. Here's the problem. You're saying that Israel and America and Saudi Arabia are all doing these genocides. They suck at it. They're the worst genocidal people in the world. They suck at genocide. They're fail sons. Because every time they try it, they just keep sending money to keep people from starving to death and trying to alleviate hunger and thirst. Dude, they literally they spent $40 million last month. $40 million just last month. Giving aid to over 2 million Yemenis that were on the verge of starvation as a result of Iran and their Houthi thugs. So if they're trying to do genocide, they suck at it. They're fail sons because they keep on giving money to the people that they're trying to genocide to not starve to death. How does this make
millions of Yemenis are starving because of the Saudis?
No. That's the Iranian Houthis, dude. That's the Iranian Houthis.
Last time I checked, the Houthis aren't the ones bombing Yemen.
No. Bombing Yemen. I like that. So do you think that the U.S. is bombing Niger right now? You think the U.S. has been bombing Niger?
I said the Saudis, not the U.S.
No, I asked that question because, some of your buddies like Kyle Kulinski would say, oh, the U.S. is bombing Niger because the U.S. had the permission of the Nigerian government to bomb terrorists inside of Niger. You understand that there's a distinction between Yemen, whose legitimate and rightful government is Hadi, and the Houthis that are insurrectionary fifth column seditious terrorists that have raised hell and burned the country to the ground. You recognize that bombing Yemen? No. They're bombing terrorists that happen to be in Yemen. They literally, the Yemeni government begged them to do that. So what happened to sovereignty? What happened to spheres of influence?
In 2018, 5,000 of their airstrikes were against civilians. 2,000 of them targeted transportation and economic infrastructure.
No, you're confusing collateral damage right now with purposeful targeting of civilians. They went after Houthi targets in Yemen with the intent of disrupting their war machine, with the intent of bringing them to their knees so that they could restore the legitimate and peaceful government of Hadi and restore peace and prosperity to the people of Yemen. What happened to sovereignty? What happened to
civilian
sovereignty?
infrastructure is not terrorists, Kevin.
When you bitch and whine about Israel or whatever, going after Assad or whatever, you'd say it's his sovereignty, right? What happened to Hadi's sovereignty? Why don't pro-Western countries have sovereignty? Why is it only anti-Western?
Bombing civilian infrastructure is not bombing terrorists, Kevin. Earlier you were criticizing Russia for bombing hospitals. The Saudis do that in Yemen all the time as well. Even Western media is fucking reading this.
Need a source. When was the last time that Saudi Arabia? When did Saudi Arabia purposefully bomb a hospital?
The conversation.com, foreignpolicy.com, these are all sources that talk about this. I can link them to you if you want.
No, yeah, link me an article right now, literally, dude, because it seems like you got a tough and buff talk, but you don't really have any sources to back it up. That's what I'm getting here. I mean, you already said you read Sputnik, so I mean, I'm sure you could find a Sputnik article saying Saudi bad, Iran good. Why do you simp Iran, dude? Why do you simp Iran?
Because they're not Saudi Arabia.
Oh, okay. Well, you're honest. That's actually a better answer than I was expecting. I was expecting you to say, oh, because they're like defending their interests or whatever, and like U.S. is imperialist. But you just say straight up, they're not Saudi Arabia. So let it be known for the record that the House of Saud lives rent-free in your head, and you're just a contrarian little bitch. So
at least Iran's not the one committing genocide in Yemen.
Let me ask you this: whose side are the Houthis on? Are they with Saudi Arabia, or are they funded by Iran?
The Houthis are not the ones committing genocide. It's the Saudis who are committing it. 8 million people are starving because of the Saudi blockades and airstrikes, which the U.S. is supporting.
So if Saudi Arabia is trying to starve the people in Yemen, an ally of theirs, why did they spend over $1 billion? I want an answer. Why did they spend over $1 billion to keep them from starving to death? Simply on aid, not on military stuff or anything, just on aid. Like, why does the King Salman Relief Agency even exist if their intent is to cause genocide? Because I can tell you this, Iran doesn't have an equivalent. Iran didn't send money over there to help Yemeni people, because I just told you just in the last month, they spent $40 million, Saudi Arabia did, to help 2.2 million Yemenis that were nearing death from starvation. How much money has Iran given to those 8 million or so that are vulnerable in Yemen? Nothing. You know why? Because where does their money go? It goes to buy guns to ship over to the Houthis to cause more chaos and starvation in Yemen. So who's
Iran isn't the one military involved in Yemen. It's the Saudis. So of course they're going to have to pay for their own crimes.
Do you deny that the Houthis are a proxy force for Iran?
Iran did not create the Houthis. They were rebels that rose up on their own. All Iran is doing is supporting them by providing weapons.
So you admit that Iran supports the Houthis then? Okay. Well, at least there's that. So you said you support Iran because they're not Saudi Arabia. Well, I appreciate the honesty. I think that that's a blatantly contrarian and childish answer, but at least you're honest about it. Why do you support North Korea?
Because I don't support the U.S. aggression and imperialism. Simple as that.
So who invaded South Korea in 1950?
It's not an invasion. South Korea is part of the same country.
So you think that the Korean War was a civil war? Is that it?
Yeah.
Are you a troll, bro?
No. I don't see why you're laughing.
So let me ask you this. Where would you rather live? The United States and South Korea or North Korea?
Why are you asking me this?
Because you support North Korea, so it's a fair question. Where would you rather
so
live?
What? You support military action, but you're not in the military.
When am I joining the military, though? Dude, you did the meme, dude. You did the meme, dude. Dude, you support North Korea. When are you moving over there? When are you going to, man up, walk the walk, and actually go and live in one of these regimes that you sub for? Because, like, you live in the West, don't you? You live in a Western country, to my understanding. Is that correct?
I prefer to keep that anonymous.
So you don't live in North Korea, is that correct?
If that makes you sleep at night, I don't know.
Yeah, so why don't you move there? Why don't you move to these paradises of workers' anti-imperialism? Like, why don't you just get the fuck out of my countries, man?
I don't live in Canada.
I said countries, like the West. You're anti-Western. Why don't you get the fuck out of the West? You don't like it here. You hate everything we stand for. You're a fifth column. Why don't you go and be a patriotic North Korean in North Korean? Why don't you go do that?
I mean, I never revealed where I live, so how would you even know?
Probably would have a hard time getting on StreamYard here if you lived in North Korea. Just a guess. Just a guess. So. Do you have any plans to leave the West? Or are you just going to stay here and be a seditious piece of shit?
I mean, can we talk something else? I mean, I'm not revealing where I live.
So, let's say, regardless of where you live, where would you rather be born? If you're going to be born again, and, you know, reincarnation's real, all that kind of stuff, would you rather be reincarnated in the United States or North Korea?
Why does it only have to be North Korea?
Yeah, no. I'll tell you this. When they take you to the back and send you to the gulags, or you're bored in one of those regional provinces and then countryside with no electricity and running water and everything, I'll tell you this, you'd be begging for some neoconservatism pretty damn fast. I'll tell you that, bud. So.
Maybe the country wouldn't be like that if it wasn't for U.S. sanctions and bombings during the Korean War.
Dude, it's 2021. The Korean War, like the fighting part of it, stopped in 1953. That's your cope. That's your cope why North Korea sucks so bad, because they got bombed in 1953 for a war that they started. That's your cope. That's your cope. Wait, what? It's going to be 200 years down the road and you're going to be like, yeah, it's a shithole, but like some stuff happened 200 years ago, so we can't clean our room, man. Dude, that's embarrassing. Dude, your cope
20% of the population was killed, though, because of the American bombings. Don't you think that would be relevant?
They started the war. That was a total war, actually, as a matter of fact.
What business does the U.S. have in Korea?
No, but you can make the same argument against Japan. Japan also started the war. Like, this was a total war. And total wars involve strategic bombing to destroy their capacity to wage war, which means targeting factories, targeting infrastructure, etc. That was a total war.
So you support targeting civilians? That's what you're saying, if necessary.
In a total war, there aren't really any civilians. The good thing about drone warfare and stuff nowadays is that the U.S. and Israel don't have to do total wars, that we can do precision strikes because we're not in the 1950s anymore. But back then, with the technology they had at the time, you had to destroy their capacity to wage war. So it's called strategic bombing. It was perfected by Curtis LeMay. You should probably look into it. So like, you don't think that Hiroshima and Nagasaki were justified then? Like, would you say you support the Japanese Empire in World War II?
Of course not.
So you don't think that...
I have to support... But that doesn't mean I have to support killing thousands of Japanese civilians with atom bombs either.
You understand more Japanese civilians would have died if the U.S. invaded the mainland Honshu in November 1945, right? Upwards of 1 million.
They were getting ready to surrender.
No, they weren't. If that were true, then why after Nagasaki, the second bomb, why was the Imperial Council... Why were they still split on whether or not they wanted to surrender to the U.S. or not? Why did it take 2 atom bombs to get them to consider surrender if they wanted to surrender before?
They were already... Because surrendering takes time.
That's your excuse? That's your cope? Okay. Wow. You should probably look into the actual history of the war with Japan. Okay. Wow. Okay, well that's been revealing. So, I mean, I've got a drama stream in a couple hours. I don't have all the time here to debate you. I think people have gotten you know, to see what death to Western imperialism is all about. But if you got any closing statements or anything, definitely feel free. So.
Okay. I would just like to say that, I'm glad that the U.S. empire is slowly in decline. I hope the U.S. loses its hegemony sometime soon. Fuck the U.S. That is all.
Well, there you go. And I would argue that you are a fifth column and seditious, and you should leave the Western Hemisphere, get off Twitter, and go and live in a country in one of those anti-imperialist workers' paradises that you sent for that doesn't allow Twitter, and go and be one of the comrades. Basically, walk the walk. That's what I would say. But that was the debate here. Death to Western imperialism. You're interested in debating me out there? Send me a DM on Twitter, and you can get to debate me too, just like Death over here. So with that, I'll be doing a post show in about 5 minutes. I'll see you there. Death to Western imperialism. Yeah, I do hope that you leave our hemisphere for sure. So have a good night, everybody.